Hello and welcome to the Dream Team Professor podcast. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the top players to target in February. So we're actually going to start off with fixtures. And I think the best place to start is both with fixture volume and with fixture difficulty. So I've got a display on screen here. This is the fixture grid from Fantasy Football Stuff. The website is ffstuff.co.uk and you can get Mike on Twitter at FFSTUFF3. I find it's a really easy way to look at the fixtures, and they also have a few good features as well, like looking at player data. You can look at your mini league rivals. There's some really helpful stuff there, but I'm focusing on the fixture grid here first because I think this is the best way at looking at the layout for the following month. So I've set this up so you can look at the fixtures coming up from the start of February all the way through to the end, and then this little bit here just shows you how many fixtures each team will have. February's quite a difficult one because there's a lot of cup games and European fixtures and rearranged fixtures, so these are a little bit fluid and they can change throughout the month depending on how the cup games go, but this is the best place to start. So I'm going to highlight the teams with the best fixture volume first. So Manchester United play 8 games in February. You have Manchester City with 7. Spurs and Leeds have 6. Then you have quite a few teams on 5. You have Liverpool, Chelsea and Arsenal from sort of the traditional big 6. Then you've got Brighton, Fulham, Southampton, West Ham and Leicester all on 5. Then pretty much all the rest of the teams are on 4, and that includes Newcastle. I'm going to highlight them because they've been really quite popular throughout Dream Team so far, especially their backline. But now's the time where it gets a little bit difficult to make a decision because you've got their backline that's doing really well, but they've only got 4 games, whereas versus like a Manchester United, Man United have potentially double the fixtures with 8 games this month. So it's going to be a real hard decision to make. So that's why I find this is the best place to start for this episode. So you can see this on the grid here, and it's color coded as well for fixture difficulty too. I tend to like to figure this part out myself because it does change depending on form. Obviously teams like Liverpool at the minute, the fixtures can look good, but they're not in good form. So it's quite hard to decide how you think these games are going to go. So I like to decide on that part myself. One thing to add when it comes to this fixture grid and changes, you had Newcastle who have now gone through to the EFL Cup final, but you've got Manchester United who are playing this evening as well. So there will be a few changes. This will gradually update on the FFSTUFF website, but obviously I can't update my grid at this time. But around the sort of time of I think it's the 26th of February, I think that's a Sunday, that's when the EFL Cup final is going to take place. So Man United and Newcastle's game is going to be postponed and then replaced with that Carabao Cup fixture. So another good feature of this grid is you can go through and tick the teams and then sort of narrow down the fixture grid to the teams that you want to see. So I've gone and ticked the teams that I think have the players on Dream Team that are most likely to be chosen. People like Bournemouth, no offense to them, I'm not going to be picking any Bournemouth players in my team, for example, so I've ruled them out of it. So I've gone with Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Man United, Tottenham, Arsenal. I've put Leeds in there just because they have 6 fixtures, which is a lot of games. I'm still not convinced that I'd bring in any myself, but I think it needs to be put in there. West Ham have got 5, Brighton have got 5, who are in really good form. Southampton with 5 games as well, and then Newcastle with just the 4. And then in this bottom right corner as well, I've just added this in here for you to see. It makes it a little bit easier when you're planning. You've got the FA Cup draw here as well, so there's still some of the games still to be decided who's going to be playing who, like Tottenham could be playing Sheffield United or Wrexham. So I've just put the FA Cup draw in that bottom right corner for you to have a look at as well. But in terms of fixture volume then, so really it's Man City and Man United are the 2 best that you're going to want to choose from. I think you'll be at a real advantage if you can try and get most players in your team from these 2 sides, because you're just going to get more opportunity to score points. So Man United with 8 and Manchester City with 7. And then of course you've got the ones with 6. So you've got Tottenham Hotspur, Leeds, who again, I don't think you really want to be picking Leeds players. You have Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, West Ham, Brighton and Southampton on 5. And then I mentioned previously Newcastle with just the 4 games, although they do look like quite good games to target. So that's the volume there. So obviously the idea of that is you're going to want to pick the teams with the most games. But then you've got the fixture difficulty comes into it as well, because having a lot of fixtures is not always the best way to go. In this example with potentially Leeds, they've got 2 games against Manchester United in there, so you do kind of have to bear that in mind. But Manchester City and Man United, I'm going to say that they're the 2 best teams to target because they're strong teams, they're in fairly good form, and the fixtures are pretty good as well. So Man United, ignore that Forest, that's taking place today, but they've got Crystal Palace, Leeds again, they've got Barcelona, they've got Leicester, they've got Barcelona in the second leg, they've got Brentford, and then they've got West Ham. So quite a good run of games there apart from the 2 Barcelona games. And then Manchester City have got 7. They've got Tottenham Hotspur, they've got Villa, they've got Arsenal, which is going to be a really tough game. Then they've got Forest, RB Leipzig, Bournemouth, and I kept thinking this is Brighton, but it's not. It's Bristol in the FA Cup. So for both fixture volume and fixture difficulty, I think these 2 are the 2 teams that we're going to want to be targeting the most. But then I've ranked the sort of best of the rest in terms of my opinion, how appealing they are and what the difficulty of the games is. So I think Arsenal probably have the best fixtures apart from Man City and Man United. So Arsenal face Everton away, Brentford at home, Man City at home, they face Aston Villa away, and then Leicester away. So apart from that Manchester City game, I think that's really quite a good run. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about that Everton fixture now. Obviously, Everton away would have been a good fixture, but now Dyche is in for Everton. They've got the new manager bounce. It's at Everton. I think that game's going to be a lot tougher than it would have been if it was played a couple of weeks ago. But if you want to win the league, you still have to beat Everton. So I think that Arsenal still have a pretty good run there, and they are in really good form. Then I'm going to go Tottenham Hotspur. So they have 6 games. So they've got the extra game over Arsenal, but they face Man City at home. They've got Leicester away. They've got AC Milan in the Champions League. They've got West Ham at home, Chelsea at home, and then they've got that FA Cup game that's to be confirmed. So I think with 6 fixtures, that is a good run. They do face City, but then so do Arsenal. And then out of the teams with the Champions League fixtures, I think AC Milan's a pretty good tie to have. Obviously, the City and Chelsea games are going to be fairly difficult, but AC Milan are not in very good form at the minute. So I think that's a pretty good run to target for Spurs. Then Chelsea, I'm going to go with them. Obviously, they've just spent a ton of money in the January transfer window, so it might be a little bit of an unsettled squad to start with, but their run is Fulham at home, West Ham away, they've got Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League, they face Southampton at home, and then Tottenham away. Then I'm going to go with Liverpool in sort of 4th in this sort of tier that I've made up. Obviously, Liverpool really aren't in good form at the minute. If you'd have looked at this run of fixtures, you probably would have said it was a really good one to target, but that would be if they were playing their best. Obviously, they can still turn it on at any minute, but yeah, you can only work with what you've got at the minute, and they aren't looking great. So their fixture run is Wolves away, Everton at home, Newcastle away, Real Madrid in the Champions League, which I fear for Liverpool in that one, and then they've got Crystal Palace away. So ideally, this does look like a good run, but Wolves have just caused Liverpool quite a few problems in the cup. That derby game against Everton, again, is probably going to be a lot harder than it would have been now they've got Sean Dyche. Newcastle away is going to be a tough game. Real Madrid is a tough game. Crystal Palace is not terrible, but it's away from home as well. So I'm going to rank Liverpool in 4th. If they were in better form, I think they'd be higher up, but at the minute, I'm not feeling too confident about them. And then in 5th, I think it's a bit of a toss-up really between Brighton and Newcastle. I think they're both similar for rankings on difficulty, but Newcastle's defence will be their strong point in this run, and I think Brighton's attack will be the strong point. So we'll start with Newcastle. So they've got West Ham at home, they've got Bournemouth away, they've got Liverpool at home, and then they've got Brighton at home. And obviously there's going to be that Carabao Cup final again, which probably is going to be against Manchester United. So that'll be thrown in there, and they might have potentially 5 fixtures, I think. And then for Brighton, so they've got Bournemouth at home, which looks like a good fixture on paper. Crystal Palace away looks okay. Fulham at home as well, so 3 good fixtures there. Then Newcastle away, that'll be a pretty tough one. and then they face Stoke away in the FA Cup. So that's a pretty good run for Brighton at the minute, and they're scoring a lot of goals. So, like I said, I think Brighton have the potential to score quite a lot of goals in that run. And then Newcastle, if you look at it, West Ham at home, I mean, West Ham aren't scoring a lot of goals at the minute. You've got Bournemouth away, which looks like a winnable fixture for Newcastle. But then the fixtures start to turn a bit tougher. So you've got Liverpool at home, obviously not in great form, but they're still always dangerous. You've got Brighton at home. Brighton are going to be a tough challenge for Newcastle. And then it falls outside of February, but I'm pretty sure the next game after that is Man City potentially for Newcastle. So they have got a tough run towards the sort of middle to the end of February. So that's my quick summary on the fixtures, the difficulty and the volume. I would keep checking both on the Dream Team app, but also on ffstuff.co.uk. They keep updating this fixture ticker as the games are announced. So keep an eye on that one. But now we're going to go on to the top players to target from each of these teams. So we are going to start with Manchester United. So Manchester United, as I said, have got the most fixtures to play in February. So they're playing Forest tonight, but then they face in February, they've got Crystal Palace at home, Leeds away, Leeds at home and then Leeds away. So they've got a double header against Leeds. They've got Barcelona, Leicester, and then Barcelona at home. Then they face Brentford and West Ham. And they've got that Carabao Cup final thrown in somewhere there. So the 26th. So there's not going to be much time between any of these games for Man United. So there could be quite a risk of rotation. But these are all really important games. So I think the main players for the team are going to be pretty much playing most games, and then if they need to be rotated, I think these players might be rested for tail end of some games potentially. But we'll start with Marcus Rashford. So he's been the standout performer for Man United so far this season, and since the World Cup he's been absolutely on fire. So he's the third highest point scorer in the game now. He's got 18 goals and 5 assists, and he doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon. He's actually rested for the game against Nottingham Forest tonight, I've seen. But he's the best striker, in my opinion, to target alongside Erling Haaland. I think at the minute still, and I've been saying it for the last few episodes, I think it's Haaland, Rashford, and then it has to be Kane, in my opinion, for the top 3 strikers. But I actually think Rashford's probably the second most informed striker behind Rashford, or arguably the most informed, but just Haaland cannot leave your team. So I think Rashford's the best one to target. You have to have him in your team for February. But then Bruno Fernandes, I'm going to say after that. So Bruno Fernandes, there's been 9 games since the World Cup, and he only didn't get a rating in 2 of those 9 games. And we were saying before the World Cup, or just before the restart, that he was getting a lot of 7 ratings, but he needed to start getting some goals and assists. But now he's on 6 goals and 6 assists, and he's had 21 ratings out of 30. So he's really shot up there now. In the overall sort of leaderboard for the midfielders, and he's averaging 3.9 points per game, which isn't the highest, but I think he started off a little bit less and now he's started to build up those points. So I think Rashford and Bruno Fernandes are must-haves in your team. If you can fit both of them players in for these 8 fixtures, I think you really are going to rack up the points. On to defence, I think Martinez is probably going to be the best option now. So on the right hand side, I've got just a clip from the Dream Team website. So Rashford and Bruno are the top 2. Funnily enough, Dalot is still up there with 91 points as the third highest point scorer for Man United. So considering he's been out since the World Cup, it just goes to show how good he was doing before that. But I think Martinez, while Dalot's out, is the best option in that defence. He's gone up quite a lot in price now. So he's 4.4 million, which makes him quite a bit ahead of Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka, who probably are the other 2 best options. But Martinez has got 5.8 as his last 5 average. He was rested for that Reading game, but before that he played 7 games in a row. So he's pretty much nailed in this Man United side. He's a bit more expensive, but I think he's a really good option to have. Obviously worked with Ten Hag before at Ajax as well, so you know that he is a favourite with the manager. If you are struggling a bit for budget though, and Martinez at 4.4 is a bit too steep, I think Luke Shaw is another very good option. He missed the last game with illness, but he's available for tonight. So he's a bit less money at 3.8 million, but I think he's got a bit more chance of getting attacking returns than Martinez. So you do have that upside for him. There might be a bit more chance of rotation potentially with Malacia. I think Malacia looked pretty good. I think it was against Manchester City. So there might be a little bit more rotation risk, but I still think Shaw is pretty nailed. So either Shaw or Martinez as your defenders. I don't think you can go wrong there. And then if you still are looking for an even more budget pick from Man United, Wan-Bissaka probably comes in maybe as the third best defender to choose. And I've actually got him myself in this in these teams that you're going to see in a minute, just because Dallow's out at the minute. Wan-Bissaka at right back. There isn't much of a rotation risk for Wan-Bissaka at the moment while Dalot is out. But when Dalot comes back, that's going to be a little bit of a worry for Wan-Bissaka. It probably isn't going to mean that he's dropped straight away. And I can't imagine that Dalot comes in and plays every game in this run. But there is that in the back of my mind. So I think Wan-Bissaka is still a really good option to pick now. But you just have to have in your head that you might need to replace him with Dalot or someone else. One interesting thing that I did notice though about Wan-Bissaka, he's doing really well when it comes to 7 ratings. So he's had 4 ratings from his last 5 games. And I actually think that comes from, it's not from the attacking side of things, it's from his tackle completion. So we know that Wan-Bissaka is quite renowned for his sort of last-ditch tackles, and I think these rate quite highly on Sun Dream Team. When I was doing a bit of a deep dive into why Kieran Trippier was scoring so well, obviously Kieran Trippier is a bit different because he's got the pass in and he's got the cross in. But one thing I did notice in the games where Trippier got the star man, he was actually completing a lot of tackles and blocks, and I think this is working in Wan-Bissaka's favour when it comes to getting sort of these 7 ratings. So that is one thing to look out for with Wan-Bissaka. I even think that I think it was when he was back at Crystal Palace, he was an option to have on Dream Team, and I think he was getting 7 ratings quite a lot then. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider. And then I'm going with Casemiro as an option. Now, I don't think I've got him quite far down my list. This list's quite long with Manchester United, just because pretty much there's a lot of players from Man United that are going to be good options in this run. But Casemiro is an interesting one because these defensive midfielders, they're not usually that good of an option when it comes to Dream Team. But we have seen quite a few of them doing well this season with Højbjerg and Xhaka as well. But Casemiro's been really good, and you can see he got 18 points this game week. I think he got 2 goals against Reading. And he's been really good. So he's got 4 goals and 5 assists so far this season. When you compare that to Bruno Fernandes, who's only on 6 goals, 6 assists, that's how good Casemiro's doing. And in terms of ratings as well, he does really well. So he's got ratings in 7 of his last 10 games. One thing that I kind of want to keep an eye on with Casemiro, and maybe we'll see that this weekend, but it's how will this Eriksen injury affect Casemiro? Man United have just signed Sabitzer, so I'll have to see where he fits in the squad as well. But I did wonder whether, before they signed Sabitzer, if Eriksen would be replaced maybe by Casemiro, and then a Fred or a McTominay comes in, or whether Casemiro still will be the most deep lying midfielder. It'd be just a bit interesting to see, because it will upset the balance a little bit of that Man United team that was working quite well. But I still think Casemiro will be a really good option regardless. Then last but not least, David De Gea. I think he's going to be the best option for February in goal. He's quite reasonably priced at 4 million. And with 8 fixtures, he's pretty much going to play all of these. I'm pretty sure he will play those Europa League fixtures. And although he isn't playing the game against Forest tonight, I'd have to think that if they get to a cup final, that they will play David De Gea. So I'm going to say that he's the best option to have in goal for February. If you're enjoying the video so far, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And if you're listening on Spotify, please do give us a follow on there as well. But we will move on to Manchester City next. And I think that behind Man United, these are going to be the second best team to target. They have the 7 fixtures, although they do have a couple tough ones there with Spurs away, Arsenal away, and then that RB Leipzig game as well in the Champions League is away from home as well. But Manchester City are still one of the best teams in Europe, if not the best. So I think it would be silly not to have players from this team in your team. So we're going to start with Riyad Mahrez actually first. And I think he's been in such good form since the restart. He came in at 4.7 mil if you were to get him in your team straight after the World Cup. And now he's sitting at 6.1 million. So he's had a massive rise. He's got 10 goals and 4 assists so far this season. And I just think there's some really nice fixtures there. And anyone that could usually compete with Riyad Mahrez isn't really on form at the minute. You've got Jack Grealish playing on the other side, but Phil Foden's he just hasn't been himself really. Even before the World Cup, to be honest, seemed like there was some sort of issue running into the World Cup, but since the World Cup, he's not been in favour as well. So Mahrez is pretty much nailed on that right-hand side at the minute. Of course, with Man City, there is always the chance of rotation, but across those forward lines, I think Mahrez probably is at the least risk of being rotated. And that first game against Tottenham, although that does look difficult on paper, that last time that Man City played against Tottenham, Riyad Mahrez got 19 points with 2 goals and an assist and the star man. So that could be another good fixture for Riyad Mahrez to perform in. I'm then going to say Kevin De Bruyne. He's 47% owned, it says here, but on that FFSTUFF website, which I mentioned before, you can see the percentage that they're owned in the top 100 and top 1000. And Kevin De Bruyne is 86% owned in the top 100 and top 1000. So that just goes to show that the top players, the top players are having Kevin De Bruyne in their side. And I'm not going to argue with that. And I'm going to have him all through February. So Kevin De Bruyne, I'm going to put him up there. He's 7.2 million, so he is quite expensive. And I wouldn't say he's been at his best so far since the World Cup. He's been fairly slow over the last 6 or 7 games. But historically, he's been one of the most reliable players in Dream Team over the past few seasons. So I'm going to keep him in my team throughout February. He's on 17 assists and 3 goals for the season. And I think once he starts chipping in with a few more goals, he'll look a lot more appealing to own. 5.2 average. It's not the best, but it's still pretty high. So I think Kevin De Bruyne is one that you definitely have to consider for your side. I'm not really going to waste any time mentioning this next one. Erling Haaland, really, he could have easily been at the top of this list, but I just think it's just an obvious one. For me, Haaland, you just got to put him in your team and leave him there unless he's injured. So I'm going to go Erling Haaland, and then I've just no comment there. So Erling Haaland, get him in your team and just leave him there for February. This is where it gets a little bit difficult with Man City. So onto their defence. We've just seen them get rid of Cancelo. Apparently had a falling out with Pep Guardiola, and now he's gone to Bayern Munich. So that's going to have a little bit of a knock on with Man City, but they do still have a ton of options in that defence. But I think the real winner from this Cancelo moving on, Cancelo mostly plays at left back for City, although he does play at right back as well. But he was mostly playing at left back, and Ake had been playing at left back as well. So I think that Ake is probably the biggest winner for Cancelo going. And the only real left back options other than Ake now, because they haven't replaced him in the window, it's going to be either Gomez, who never really seems fancied by Pep Guardiola. He's played twice since the restart. Or you've got Laporte, who could fill in at left back. I think he filled in a previous game recently at left back, but doesn't seem ideal. So I think Ake is probably going to be the biggest winner from this Cancelo move. And then Ake got 18 points in the last game. He got the goal in the FA Cup against Arsenal. So he's going to get a rise going into this next lot of transfers. And I think he's probably the defender that I'm going to want to target from Man City at the moment. He's only 3.7 million as well. So quite a nice price point there to get into that Man City defence. Then I'm going to go on to Rico Lewis, who is also another cheap option in that Man City defence at 2.9 million at the minute. I actually took him out of my vlog team. I think it was just last week before the Arsenal game. I didn't expect him to play that Arsenal one, and of course he got the clean sheet as well. I think indirectly he's a little bit more appealing with Cancelo gone, because obviously Cancelo could play at right back. You also have got Kyle Walker that plays there. I don't think Lewis is going to be nailed still, because we've seen John Stones can sometimes play at right back, although he's injured now. I think he got injured in the Arsenal game. And I think at times they even played Akanji at right back. But I think at the moment, Lewis is in favour, and he's going to be rotated with Walker most often. So, but at 2.9 million and 7 fixtures, I think there's a good chance that he features in the majority of these games. So he could be another good option. And then Akanji's probably going to be the other one to target. So with Stones out, Akanji probably seems like the most in favour centre-back at the minute with Pep Guardiola. But I would just keep an eye on Ruben Diaz. So Ruben Diaz, he hasn't really been playing since the World Cup. He's been injured. But I was quite impressed when I had a look at this, or surprised rather, when I look at this Man City top point scorers. In defence, you've got Cancelo was the highest scoring defender with 99 points. And then Diaz is up there with 76. He's on the same amount of points as Ake, but he's barely played recently. So it just goes to show that sort of Cancelo and Diaz were racking up those points earlier on in the season. Laporte's nowhere to be seen here, and then Stones is a little bit lower down. And Akanji, surprisingly, considering how many games he's played, he's only down here on 58 points, which is just 8 more points than Rico Lewis. Just something that really surprised me, because Ake seemed like he was probably the most nailed defender for quite a big period of time here. So when choosing Ake, obviously he has been relatively nailed throughout the season so far. But with the Diaz and Laporte now coming back to fitness, I think there could be some rotation going on there. Maybe we'll see Laporte going on to that left-hand side though. And then Ederson, so the keeper, I think he's still a good option throughout this run. But in terms of volume and difficulty, I think that David De Gea probably looks like a better pick for now. Then on to the Arsenal then. So we've got 5 fixtures. Sorry, I say we as they're my team, but we have 5 fixtures in February. Everton away from home, already mentioned, I'm a little bit worried about that game with Sean Dyche. But we have Brentford at home, Man City at home, Aston Villa away, and then Leicester away. So just the 5 fixtures, a lot less than Man United and Manchester City. But the fixtures are fairly good apart from that Man City game. So it does look like a good run for Arsenal. I'd probably say that Ødegaard would be the best one to target. He's at a really nice price point with 3.6 million. I think that's really reasonable, and he's just broke 100 points as well. So you've got, for Arsenal, you've got Gabriel, Ødegaard and Saka, who have all broke 100. But Ødegaard's quite significantly cheaper than Saka at 3.6 million versus 4.3, and then Gabriel's at 4.4 as well. So I think for the price, Ødegaard's probably the best value in this Arsenal team. When it comes to comparing Ødegaard and Saka as well, Arsenal have just bought Trossard, who is going to really be providing competition all across the front line for Arsenal. I think Martinelli's most at risk, and Saka does seem like the main man who we won't rotate if we can help it. But when it comes to Ødegaard, the only real player that can sort of rotate with Ødegaard is Fabio Vieira. And I didn't think Fabio Vieira really looked very good against Manchester City, and he has been a little bit disappointing. He did shine in that game against Oxford, but that's Oxford, it's a different level. So I think Ødegaard's probably the most nailed player in that Arsenal team at the minute from the attacking options. Then obviously Saka, I said we won't really rotate him unless we can help it, but he did look a little bit tired recently in that Man City game. He's on 8 goals and 8 assists. Compare that to Ødegaard, who's on 8 goals and 5 assists. So fairly similar. Saka is on penalties. The only thing that might jeopardise that is the Jorginho sign-in, but I don't imagine that Jorginho is going to start the majority of games. But obviously he is a really good penalty taker. But personally, I'd just keep Saka on penalties, to be honest, for the time being, until he misses one maybe. But Saka and Ødegaard, I think it is a toss-up really, which one you'd go for. Saka, probably, if they were the same price, I'd probably say Saka. But Ødegaard being at 3.6 million does seem a little bit more appealing. Then another player that I'm going to mention from the attackers, obviously, is Eddie Nketiah, who's really stepped up his game since he's had to take Jesus' place through injury. He's been really good, and he's got 9 goals in total, 7 goals in his last 8 games. So he really has performed well when he's needed. And do think that he is a good option to put in your team, maybe if you're really struggling for budget. He isn't looking as much of a budget pick at 3.5 million now. Obviously, he was in the 2 million price point at one point when they first came into the team. The only problem I have now is that Eddie Nketiah is the same price as Ødegaard, and personally, I think that Ødegaard is a better pick at the minute in Dream Team. So I would really look to have, like I said, Rashford, Kane, Haaland up front, and then if I was going to try and get a bit of budget elsewhere, I'd go for Ødegaard rather than bringing Eddie Nketiah into the front line and then trying to have a different midfielder. So I think Eddie is a really good option, but I just think there's better options out there. When it comes to the Arsenal defence, I can't really see past Gabriel at the minute. So earlier on in the season, I thought Saliba looked like a good pick. It was kind of between Saliba and Gabriel, with Gabriel being a little bit more expensive, but both of them seem to be equally nailed. But looking at the points now, Gabriel's on 100 points and Saliba's on 69. So there's quite a big gap opened up there. Gabriel seems to be getting the nod if there's a midweek game that comes up, maybe in the FA Cup or the Europa League. It did seem like they rotated, but it was usually Gabriel that got given that fixture. So I think Gabriel's benefited from that, and he has a bit more attacking threat as well, Gabriel. So at 4.4 million, I do think he's the better option. You've got Ben White, who's fairly close behind Gabriel when it comes to points. So he's on 96 versus Gabriel's 101. I do think White is a good option, but now Tomiyasu's back fully fit and he has been looking good as well. I think that there's more rotation risk with Ben White than there is with Gabriel. Arsenal have just signed a new left-sided centre-back, so he could provide competition with Gabriel. But with the Premier League being the main objective for Arsenal, I don't think we're going to see any rotation for Gabriel in the Premier League. And it depends how late on into the Europa League we get, whether or not we see Gabriel or we ever see the new guy. I couldn't remember his name, but it's Kivior. So personally, between Gabriel and White, I'd go Gabriel. But if you are looking for a cheaper option, you have got Saliba, who I mentioned, or you have Zinchenko, who's slightly cheaper. Zinchenko, though, I would be a little bit careful. So Zinchenko's at 4.1 million, which is actually quite expensive, really. And one thing that I saw is that Zinchenko has less points than Rob Holding at the minute. So Zinchenko's on 45 points and Rob Holding is on 49. It might be a little bit skewed because obviously there was the Europa League games and we kept quite a few clean sheets there. But just looking into the ratings, Zinchenko hasn't really got the rating points that regularly. So I think I would still wait and see. And with Zinchenko, I thought that he might get sort of a few goals and assists throughout the season, but that position that he's sort of getting into isn't really an attacking position to put crosses in. It's more of an extra body in midfield, so I don't think that Zinchenko is a very good option at the minute in defence. Just to summarise that one, I think that probably going forward it's either Ødegaard or Saka as the main options that I'd want to target from Arsenal, or in defence, I'd really try and go with Gabriel if you had the budget. If you didn't, I probably wouldn't go for Ben White. I'd just take the step down and go for Saliba at 3.5, just because Ben White at 4.8 doesn't really feel like very good value to me. Then coming on to Spurs then. So Spurs have one extra game than Arsenal. So they start off with Man City at home. Obviously, they didn't do very well against Man City in the last fixture, but Spurs on the counter-attack, they have had some success against teams like Man City before. So Harry Kane could be a good option there, or Son potentially. They face Leicester next. Then they have AC Milan, which I mentioned AC Milan because they've lost their last 3 games and they haven't won a game in their last 6. So AC Milan aren't doing very well at the minute. Obviously, we've got, 2 weeks until that game, so things could change. But at the moment, AC Milan haven't been very good. So that could look quite promising for Spurs. After that AC Milan game, they've got West Ham at home and they've got Chelsea at home. So 2 London derbies, they could be tough games, but players like Harry Kane can score in all of these fixtures. Harry Kane is the 4th highest scoring player on the game. He's got 18 goals, 4 assists, and he's sat on 158 points now. So he's still having a really, really good season. I think the the sort of form of Rashford at the minute, and obviously Haaland just being incredible, has kind of taken a bit of the shine off of Kane so far as a dream team asset, but he has still been having a really good season. He's a big game player as well, so I think that Harry Kane is a perfectly good pick for this run in February. You have got Son. Before the FA Cup game, you wouldn't really have considered him. He got 2 goals in that last one, so he might pick up a little bit of form, but he still is only on 8 goals and 3 assists. So I think it is probably a brave move or a differential if you're going to bring Son into your team. But I think I'd keep an eye on him, put him on your watch list, because yeah, once he starts hitting his usual form, he could be a very good option like he has been in previous seasons. I'm still not convinced by Spurs' defence. So I'm not going to include any Spurs defenders in the team. The third person that I'm going to put down is Kulusevski. I'm not sure on Richarlison at the minute whether he's back fit. He was missing recently for that FA Cup game through injury. Kulusevski, he does look dangerous, but I kind of convinced myself out of him being an option while writing this. So he looks really dangerous while he's playing. He has got potential to get attacking returns. But the only problem with Kulusevski at the minute, he's 3.7 million, which makes him more expensive than Ødegaard. And in my opinion, Ødegaard, this isn't even my Arsenal bias, Ødegaard has been far clear of Kulusevski in Dream Team this season. So at the minute, 3.7 million. I'd keep an eye on Kulusevski, but I do think there's better options there for that price. The one player that I would look at in that Spurs defence, and obviously it's one to watch. I don't think he's even been put in the game yet, but their new signing, Pedro Porro, he's got 2 goals and 7 assists so far for Sporting this season. So he's their new signing, and you can see that he's got good attacking returns so far for them. So he could be one to watch. Doherty's just had a strange move from Spurs. I think he's gone on loan now to Atletico Madrid, so hoping to be the next Kieran Trippier potentially. So we'll keep an eye on him in future seasons. But with Doherty out, I think that just leaves, on the right-hand side, that leaves Emerson Royale and Porro fighting it out on that right wing spot. So he could be one to watch. Obviously not at the moment, but with those attacking returns, he could be one to watch in the future. Then on to Chelsea. So they've got 5 fixtures. They've got Fulham at home, West Ham away. They've got Dortmund away in the Champions League. They face Southampton at home, and then they have Tottenham away from home. So they've got 3 of the London clubs in that run, but it does look like a good run of games. Fulham, West Ham, Southampton are all winnable games for Chelsea. Borussia Dortmund away seems like it could be a tough game. And then Tottenham away, that game's always quite a tough one as well. But yeah, I think this could be a good run for Chelsea. They've obviously signed a lot of players, so I don't think we can really be too sure on what the lineup's going to look like. And that's why I'm going to say Kepa is probably the best player to target, in my opinion. He's the cheapest European playing goalkeeper, so he's 3.4 million. And I was actually looking through the stats, and I mean, he's got more points at the minute than Ederson so far. So I think that's a fairly good option. Obviously, Ederson is 4.5 million. Kepa is 3.4, and Kepa's not that far behind Alisson, De Gea, who are quite significantly more expensive at 4 million. So I think Kepa could be quite a good option in goal, maybe if you want to save a bit of budget. And what I like about Kepa as an option, that defence of Chelsea is so hard to predict in a minute with so many different options. Kepa is probably the only one that you can rely on to play every week and then get you those clean sheet points when they come. So I'm going to say Kepa as the first option. I'm not going to recommend this player coming straight into your team, but I would like to keep an eye on Mason Mount potentially. Mount's 3.6 million, and so that puts him in a similar position to like Kulusevski and Ødegaard. So for now, I still think Ødegaard's a much better pick, but if Chelsea can pick up some form, I do think Mount's one of those players that was quite in favour with Potter, so he could still be a good player to pick. And at 3.6 million, you could still probably get on him at a good price if he does start to find some form like we've seen in previous seasons. But for now, he's one to watch, not one to bring in straight away. Another thing to keep an eye on is João Felix. Obviously, he did look really good in that game before he got sent off. He's back from suspension on February the 11th. So that would see him potentially playing in that West Ham fixture, but missing the Fulham game. So they have a run there where they have some midweek fixtures as well. So they've got West Ham, Dortmund and Southampton. I expect him to be at least involved in 2 of those games. They have just added Mudryk to their squad. He's 3.4 million. He did look promising against Liverpool when he come on, but I still don't think we've seen enough from him to warrant putting him in your team yet. But if he plays that Fulham game, for example, and looks like he's quite dangerous, maybe gets an attacking return, I would keep an eye and potentially consider him for that West Ham, Dortmund, Southampton run of games. The last player that I'm really going to mention from Chelsea is Thiago Silva. He's the 6th highest scoring defender in the game so far. He's pretty much just behind the Newcastle block and Gabriel, but at 5.8 million, I think that's far too expensive. And the Chelsea defence hasn't really proved that they can be that reliable at the minute. So for that price point, you want a team that's looking really defensively strong. So I wouldn't go near Thiago Silva unless we do start seeing Chelsea get a string of clean sheets together. But by that point, he might even be high into the sixes. So for the moment, I'm not going to go with Thiago Silva, but he is having a good season. One other person to watch could be Reece James. He's back in training, and he is someone that, if he's playing, he's 5.8 million now, the same as Thiago Silva. And I don't really mind paying that sort of 5.8 million for a player like James who can get goals and assists quite regularly. But the problem with James is keeping fit at the moment. Then on to the struggling Liverpool. So for the moment, this is a team that I'm going to want to avoid. And you wouldn't have thought this at the start of the season, but they've got 5 fixtures in February: Wolves, Everton, Newcastle, Real Madrid and Crystal Palace. Now that does look like a good run of fixtures, but like I said, they've struggled previously. So Wolves caused them problems. You've got Everton at home, which they should be winning that one, but it's going to be tough. And then Newcastle is a much more difficult game than it used to be. Real Madrid, I can't see them beating Real Madrid. It's a home game, and at Anfield, Liverpool can always turn it on, of course, but Real Madrid have to be the favourites, I think, in that on current form. And then they play Crystal Palace. So for me, I'm going to be avoiding these players, in all honesty. Liverpool did look like they kind of sorted their defence out a little bit. I think they got a clean sheet against Wolves in the Cup. Then they got that clean sheet against Chelsea, which was a really dull game. So it did look like they were sort of getting their act together. But then they weren't good against Brighton in that last fixture. They looked a bit troubled without Virgil van Dijk at the back. They looked a bit troubled with him at the back as well, to be honest, at times. But yeah, I wouldn't be going near any of their defenders at the minute. Salah isn't really doing it, so obviously he's got high potential, but he's only got 10 points from his last 5 games. He got a lot of blanks recently, and for 8 million plus, I think just Kane, Haaland and Rashford are all better options at the minute. So I think I'm going to wait until Salah seems to hit a bit more form, and maybe they look a little bit more steady up front. They keep chopping and changing. They brought Gakpo in and he hasn't looked good at all. He's blanked in all 5 games that he's played. And then Darwin Núñez, he's dangerous, but yeah, they just don't look like a fully functioning team up front at the minute. So Salah I'd avoid personally, but if he does turn it back on, you would consider bringing him back in. Darwin Núñez, again, I don't think those striker options are to be messed with at the minute. I think Rashford, Haaland, Kane. Elliott though, Harvey Elliott, I think that he could be a fairly good option if you're looking for a budget pick at the minute. So 2.4 million, and he's been the bright spark over the last few games from Liverpool. He's got 2 goals in his last 3 games. So we're going to highlight Elliott as kind of a budget pick maybe. Gakpo I mentioned, he's been pretty poor since he come in. I don't blame him. He's come into a Liverpool team that just isn't functioning right now. The only thing that I might mention is that Real Madrid game. Virgil van Dijk, I think that's a target for him to be back for, and potentially Jota as well. So I think avoid Liverpool for this run, unless we see something significant. But after that first Real Madrid game, when they get Virgil van Dijk back and Jota, it might be that we start to consider Liverpool players then. So towards the end of February or maybe going into March. But for the time being, I'm going to avoid them. Then on to Newcastle then. So Newcastle have obviously been brilliant this season. They're right up there challenging in the league, challenging for those European places really at the moment. Kieran Trippier has been the best player so far by far. He's on 184 points now, which is ridiculous. But the problem with Newcastle now is they have 4 fixtures. So they've been a really good team to have. The Newcastle block has been smashing it. But now they're in a situation where they almost playing half as many games as the likes of Man United and Man City. So just the 4 fixtures. They've got West Ham at home and Bournemouth away, which on paper they still look like really good fixtures. So although they only play once a week, I don't think I'd be in a rush to get rid of Newcastle players potentially. I think you could keep with them for those 2 fixtures and hope for the clean sheet points. But then they face Liverpool at home and then Brighton at home, which are 2 tougher games. Obviously, I've just been slagging Liverpool off, but they can always hurt any team. So that could be a tough game. And then Brighton, I think, is a tough game at the moment as well. And then, as I mentioned, Newcastle face Manchester City after that. So it's a tough run of games for Newcastle after the midway point in February. And they are only playing 4 games. They will have that FA Cup game thrown in as well, actually. So there's an extra one there. But yeah, it's not looking ideal for having Newcastle players in February. I think they'll perform just fine. But could your money be spent better elsewhere with the likes of City and Man United? I think so. So when it comes to their defence, obviously Kieran Trippier's been miles ahead. He's up there at 6.6 million. He's getting 5 points per game. He's getting 6.8 points per game. And he's on 184 points. So he's been brilliant. It's about 50 points clear of the nearest defender as well. So for me, I'm looking to keep Kieran Trippier and just keep him in my team. Trippier is really the only sort of premium defender that is getting regular attacking returns, star mans, ratings. So I think I'm going to stick with Trippier for the month of February and probably from now on, really, unless anything bad happens. But I will be looking to move on some of those other Newcastle defenders, probably either at the midpoint where they face Liverpool or even a little bit earlier. So Kieran Trippier is a hold, but I think we can probably move on the likes of Cher, Burn and Botman either in the middle, or if you want to get a little bit ahead, you could do it earlier. But I do think West Ham and Bournemouth look like good games. Newcastle have just signed Anthony Gordon for 1.9 million. That's his dream team price. It was a lot more than that. They've just signed Anthony Gordon and he's 1.9 million on Dream Team. I'll be keeping an eye on him. I'm not too sure where he'll fit in. So that's really what we want to know first. You've got Almiron who's been playing on the right. Obviously, you've got Wilson and Isak who can play through the middle. And maybe we'll see Gordon on the left where Joe Linton's been playing and Joe Linton goes back into midfield potentially. But at that price, he has got the potential of being a budget pick. But I don't think I'd go near it for the time being. It's just one to watch. Then Almiron, though, he's been a player that's been really popular throughout Dream Team and he's had a really good season, but he has just started to tail off a little bit now with his attacking returns. He got an assist this week. He's the 8th highest midfielder in the game as well, so 9 goals, 2 assists. But yeah, like I said, he has slowed down now. His last 5 average is 1.6, so obviously his points returns have really dropped. But with West Ham at home and Bournemouth away, I could see the temptation to hold on to him for a little bit longer. I don't think that I will be holding on to him. I definitely wouldn't be bringing him in. If you already have him, you could keep him for West Ham and Bournemouth. But I do think you could maybe use that money to bring in a Man United defender or even upgrade to having like a midfielder potentially in an Ødegaard, for example. It's one to look at. I wouldn't blame you for holding him for those next 2 fixtures, but I definitely think I'd be looking to move Almiron on from that Liverpool-Brighton point. Then coming to Brighton then, they've been a really fun team this season. So they've got 5 games in February, Bournemouth at home, Crystal Palace away, Fulham at home, Newcastle away, and then they have Stoke in the FA Cup. So that is a really good run of fixtures, actually, a brilliant run of fixtures. The only downside for them is that they are really only playing 1 game a week. So comparing those to the likes of Man United, City and the other teams that have got European football, it's a little bit off-putting. But the only good part about that is you haven't got to worry about rotation. So you've got Matoma, who I think is the best option. And you've probably seen me celebrating him every week. He's 2.8 million. He was 1.8 million back when he scored against Arsenal. That was the 2nd game back from the World Cup. He's gone up now to 2.8, so he's gained a whole million since then. and he's on 6 goals, 2 assists for the season, and he's been in such good form. He's playing with such confidence. And I'm surprised to see that he's only 1% owned, so a massive, massive differential. He's less of a rotation risk now because Trossard's gone. He wasn't even really getting that rotated that much when Trossard was there because he was a little bit out of favour. But that is just another player out of the way that could potentially play in that position. I'm toying with whether or not I keep him. He's a really fun player to have, and this run of fixtures is good. I'm just a little bit debating whether or not I could use the extra budget elsewhere. Now he has increased in price, but I'll keep an eye on it. I really don't want to get rid of him because he's exciting and these fixtures are really good. But if you are looking for a budget pick, he's a really, really good option. Solly March is 2.8 million also. So another really good pick, really. I personally think Matoma is a better option from the eye test, but March has hit some really big numbers recently too. So he could be a really good option. And then March plays on that right-hand side. Matoma's been getting the assists and doing a lot from the left. And he put one right on the plate for March the other day, which he missed. And you've got Estepinian on the left, also putting in really good crosses. So if you're a believer these crosses come in from the left and March is getting on the end of them on the right, that could be a good option there, potentially benefiting him. But I do think I would go for Matoma over March at this point. Talking of Estepinian though, I was disappointed because I had him earlier in the season. I liked him at the World Cup. I thought he was a really good option, but he didn't really do it for the next couple of games, and Brighton hadn't been keeping clean sheets. But since then, Estepinian's been on really good form. Even in the games where Brighton haven't been getting clean sheets, he's been getting assist points and rating points. So he's on 6 assists so far from the season, and he's had 4 assists in his last 4. So I do think as a budget pick, Estepinian could be another good one. 2.1 million is very cheap for him. Probably the best value pick you could get if you're looking for a cheap defender. But just Brighton's defence has been a little bit concerning for clean sheets. They obviously did keep one fairly recently, but Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, Fulham, they look like games where you could potentially get clean sheet points. Stoke in the FA Cup, it depends what sort of team they put out. I think that Newcastle game probably will be the toughest of the bunch. But yeah, if you really are struggling for budget, I think that could be a good player to have in your team. And it's always an exciting one to watch as well. Now I'm just going to feature Leeds, West Ham and Southampton. I think these are probably sort of best of the rest. Most of the teams are on 4, but these teams have got, well, Leeds have got 6 fixtures, West Ham have got 5 and Southampton have got 5. I don't think I'd be very confident in picking any of these teams myself, but they have got slightly more fixtures. So Leeds 6 is Forest, Man United with a double header there. So Forest, Man United, Man United, Everton away, Southampton at home, and then a to be confirmed FA Cup game. So 6 fixtures for them. I wouldn't feel that confident in choosing them myself. But if you were going to go for a Leeds player, you've got Rodrigo is quite clear for points in that Leeds lineup. So he takes the penalties as well. I know Bamford used to take penalties, I think, for Leeds, but Rodrigo has been taking them. So I think he's a fairly good option. I wouldn't go there myself, but if you really fancied the punt. And then Bamford has just come back from injury as well, and he got 2 assists and the star man in the last game. So we could start seeing Bamford coming back into the starting lineup. But again, this is a punt. I won't be going there myself. It's just if you have the appetite for that sort of gamble. Then West Ham. So West Ham haven't been great this season, but their fixtures don't look terrible. Bowen, 3.5 million. He scored 18 points and 13 points in his last 2 games. So he's really hit some form. 3 goals and 2 star mans in that time as well. So if you're going to pick any player from West Ham, I think it has to be Bowen at 3.5. But again, he's at that sort of challenging price point where he sort of clashes with the likes of Odegaard. So it is still going to be a bit of a risk. Newcastle, Chelsea, Tottenham. I've actually convinced myself these aren't good fixtures at all, to be honest. Newcastle, Chelsea, Tottenham all look like pretty tough games. They've got Forest at home, which is a fairly okay one. Then they've got Man United away. So actually 5 fixtures for West Ham, but they're not great fixtures. Bowen could still be effective on the counter-attack, but again, I won't be going there. And then the last of them, Southampton. They've got 5 fixtures. They've got Brentford away, Wolves at home, Chelsea away, Leeds away, and then that FA Cup fixture to be confirmed. Adams is the top point scorer for Southampton. I don't think I've been convinced by him, to be honest. He got another goal against Newcastle, though. But again, those striker spots are a no-go, in my opinion. But James Ward-Prowse, though, he's probably the only viable option, I think. 4.1 million is a little bit pricey, but he does take all the penalties. He scores free kicks like every other week. He takes all set pieces. So he is a good option. He's got 7 goals, 2 assists, and he is playing a more advanced position under the new manager, more like a number 10. So he could be one to consider, but it doesn't come cheap at 4.1. Right, now onto my team updates then. So this is my vlog team. I've got 21 points for the game week, although I have some Man United players that are playing tonight. So 21 points for the game week. I've got David De Gea in goal. There is that Forest game, but he isn't starting it, so I can't imagine he's going to come off the bench. So no points for De Gea, which is a shame. He's probably going to get a price decrease now. Kieran Trippier I've got me 5 points. He got the assist. They didn't get a clean sheet in that one, but that just goes to show why Trippier is another good option. Fabian Schär got me no points. Wan-Bissaka is playing tonight, and I think it's currently a draw when I last looked, so could potentially get some clean sheet points there. Bruno Fernandes on 5. He's playing this evening. Got Matoma in midfield. Got me 8 points. He's been brilliant so far. I had blanks from Kevin De Bruyne and Riyad Mahrez, which was disappointing. I've got Rashford up front, who got me 3 points. Harry Kane didn't play in that FA Cup fixture, which was quite disappointing against Preston. I think he was ill for that one. And then Erling Haaland with no points against Arsenal. He had Rob Holding pocketing him in the first half and then Saliba in the second. The one time that I wouldn't mind seeing Haaland get kept quiet is against Arsenal. But this is my team so far. So 21 points for the game week. Hopefully a few more after Man United. The total points is 1,380. And the overall rank for this team is 2.9k. So I'm fairly pleased with how this one's been going. I'm aiming for 1k overall. As my sort of season target. If I can get under that, obviously I might try to reevaluate, but 2.9 at the moment. And then I have 3 transfers left out of 5 for this team. And obviously I either use them or lose them for the deadline on Friday. So it's a weird position to be in, actually. Since the World Cup, well, before the World Cup, I've been one of these managers that have been using their transfers early and then running out by the end of the month. So, but since the World Cup, yeah, I've been in a fairly good position where I haven't needed to make transfers that much. So 3 out of 5 is still a lot to have. Team value here is 63.5 million and I have 0.2 in the bank. So looking at my team at the minute, this is kind of some rough plans on what I might look to do. So looking at my forward line, Rashford, Kane, Haaland, I'm completely happy with how they're lined up and I'm happy with their fixtures going forward. So I think I'm going to keep that forward line the same. I actually quite like my midfield too at the moment. Bruno Fernandes, he's been doing really well. They've got a lot of fixtures coming up. Matoma, the fixtures are good for the following month, but there isn't that many of them. But he has been in really good form and he isn't a rotation risk. So I think I'm probably going to keep Matoma. Then I have De Bruyne and Mahrez, who have good fixtures. They didn't get points in the last game week, but I'm going to want these guys for February. So that midfield and strike force, I do quite like. When I look at the defence though, Kieran Trippier, obviously I've said before that I'm looking to keep him for the remainder of the season if he doesn't get injured. Fabian Schär though, I know Newcastle have 2 good fixtures, but probably he's looking like the weakest link now out of this team in my opinion. Obviously Matoma is limited. He is a budget pick. But Fabian Schär, he has the 2 good fixtures and then they do turn a little bit for Newcastle. So he might be someone that I look to move on. Wan-Bissaka I'm happy to keep and De Gea I'm happy to keep for Man United's good run of fixtures and their volume of fixtures. The only time I might look to move Wan-Bissaka out is, like I said, when Dalot comes back. So this leaves me in a bit of a sticky situation because I've got 3 transfers left and not many changes that I'm going to want to make. So the only ideas that I've sort of come up with, if I do want to try and use those fixtures to set me up better for February, could be Fabian Schär. Could I move him out maybe towards another Man United defender? I've got De Gea in goal and I've got Wan-Bissaka, but Man United sort of play 2 games a week now for the whole of February, whereas Newcastle's dropped to 4 fixtures for that month. So could I move potentially Fabian Schär to either Martinez at 4.4 or Luke Shaw at 3.8? That's probably what I'm going to do before the end of this window. When looking at other things that I might want to do for February, obviously I'm probably going to keep an eye on bringing in a Man City defender for that sort of run where they start playing 2 games a week in the Champions League. So I probably want to keep an eye on Ake maybe. But where do I get him in is the problem. So I'm going to want an extra Man United potentially into the share. Ake, that only really leaves me bringing in Ake for maybe Matoma. But Matoma's been in such good form lately. I'm not sure if I'm going to want to take him out. So that's the dilemma I'm having at the minute. That's going to be my main decision. Do I just take out Fabian Schär, Ake straight up, or a Manchester United defender? I think it makes more sense to be a Manchester United defender in Luke Shaw potentially, or Martinez. But then do I just burn 2 transfers? Or do I move out Matoma? But Matoma's going to get a price increase and his fixtures are good. I could take him out for someone that's potentially going to play more games, but he has been brilliant. So I'm looking now at potentially just doing Fabian Schär to a Man United defender and then maybe burning the extra 2 transfers, which feels disappointing, but do I use them for the sake of it? Let me know in the comments below what you think. Matoma, should he stay or should he go? Do I stick with my man? Then on to my second team then. So this one got me 23 points for the game week. I've got David De Gea in goal. I've kept Rico Lewis in this one, so I've got a Man City defender compared to the other team. So he got me 5 points. Kieran Trippier got me the 5, and Fabian Schär blanked. Kevin De Bruyne and Mahrez, I've got both of those in this team too. They both blanked. And then I've got Almiron in this team. So yeah, I kept the faith with Almiron in this side, and he got me 5 points. Bruno Fernandes got me 5. And then I've got the same front three: Haaland, Kane, Rashford. I did have Salah. I took him out for Kane, and then Salah ended up getting that assist, I think it was. So I would have been better off just to leave it, but I think Kane's going to be better for February. So Haaland, Kane and Rashford got me the 3 points up front. So this team's on 1,354, and the overall rank for this one is 5.3k. Transfers remaining, I only have 1 for this team. And then the team value is 63.6 million, and I have a whole 1 million in the bank. So obviously with 1 transfer left, I'm a bit more limited with what I do with my remaining transfers for this team. The obvious one I think to do, I want to keep Rico Lewis in there in this team just to have that City coverage. And then I'm just deciding what to do with Almiron. I think Almiron's the guy I want out. It would be between Almiron and Schär, and I think Schär's got good potential to get clean sheets in those next couple, whereas Almiron's been a little bit hit and miss lately. So I'm thinking Almiron out for an extra Man United defender who's got the extra fixture. So that could be Shaw or it could be Martinez potentially. I think Shaw is a bit better for price. And then I think I will look to move Schär on in the middle of next month. And I think that potentially would be for Ake. I could have a double up for Manchester City and a double up for Manchester United with the good fixture volume. The only other real issue I'm having with this team and the previous team is I don't have any Arsenal coverage. I'd like to get Ødegaard in there somewhere, but as they're set up at the minute, I quite like them. So I think it's just going to be a case of I go into February with how they are lined up after I make the changes I've mentioned. And then I just wait and see if there's any dips in form, if there's any injuries, and that might open up an opportunity for me to bring in either an Ødegaard or a Saka. I don't think I'm going to go for the Arsenal defence yet. And I won't be changing that front three unless anything drastic happens. So I think it'll be Ødegaard and Saka that I'll keep an eye on. But at the moment, I don't quite see the opportunity to bring either one of them in. That is everything for this episode, so thank you very much for watching, and if you've enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe to the channel for more Sun Dream Team content. And of course, if you have any questions or want my opinion on any of your transfer moves, feel free to comment below and I'll do my best to answer those questions. But until then, I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye.